The world has went mad. Um, Welcome to the prophetic outlook. I don't know if you're attuned to the situations that are going on, the current developments. We obviously saw what happened at the weekend. We saw what happened in terms of America stepping up and helping Israel and striking the Fordo nuclear facility, and a successful operation. But the world has went mad ever since. We're having people come out and claim, how can you hurt this Iranian regime? What did they ever do to you, other than the fact that they have had 46 years of spreading terror, of effectively trying to come against certain Western governments, including attempted assassinations. And they're the biggest spreaders of terror in the world, and they were threatening to use a nuclear device. Now, all of that aside, we'll get to that in just a second. I want to take an opportunity right now to do the usual. Please like, please share, please comment. And interestingly enough, we know that there are only 52% of people who watch this channel are actually subscribed to the channel. So that leaves a whopping 48% who do not subscribe, but they tune in every week to watch. So if you can do me the usual favor, if you can like, share, and comment, but if you're not subscribed, if you can take an opportunity right now to subscribe, to hit the notification bell, it does wonders, right? It means that you're up to date with everything that we're putting out here, with every interview that we have on, with every guest that we have on. And it means that you get to see all the content anyway, but you're subscribed. And it just makes it a lot easier for us in terms of being pushed out with the algorithm. But what are you waiting for? Subscribe now. Anyway, we want to start and we want to look at a few things that are going on. Obviously, like I said, the world seems to have gone a little bit crazy. I personally have been sucked into debates online, and I keep trying to remember that old adage, you can't argue with, I'm not going to call anybody a certain name, but you can't argue with people who just are ignorant of the situation. So regardless of arguing, what's the world doing? What's happening in the world right now? And we want to look at that today. But I've got this, and I think this is a T-shirt that I think is going to be certainly probably a bestseller. This is Keir Starmer. If you can't read it, it says the USA and Israel took out Iran's nuclear threat. All I got was this lousy T-shirt, not even a phone call from Donny. So I want to say this. I want to sort of push things in one direction. We want to look at what we covered last week and what we talked about last week and the situation we're in today. So last week I gave a warning. I think it was last Monday or last Tuesday. I think it was last Tuesday. I gave a warning about the potential shutting of the Strait of Hormuz. And the Strait of Hormuz, we know, carries 20% plus of the world's oil. So you're talking about 200 million sort of barrels of oil going through there. It is a continual, if the strait is shut, it would be a potential loss of 1 billion a day. Now, the factors to take into place here, Iran has came out right now, and the Parliament of Iran have voted to close the Strait of Hormuz. Now, that is not unexpected. If you'd actually, and I know a lot of people have been saying, well, this is just common now. But actually, if you'd went back to pre the American intervention, what you had actually seen was that there was communication jamming at the Strait of Hormuz, and there was already a ship collision. And most people pointed this to one of the IRGC ports, that the jamming signal was coming from there. Now, what does all of this mean? Well, if the strait is even interrupted, or if there is an interruption or a full closure, which I highly doubt that there can be a full closure, um, it will impact oil prices. It will impact the economy. Now, that's not, again, for us to be aware or be worried about. We be aware but not worried. We are of good cheer because Christ has first overcame this world. We're not fearful of the things that we see, but we're forewarned and we're ready. This means in this season that we can adopt the Matthew 10:16 principle, be as wise as serpents and as harmless as doves. So if, for instance, you know that oil prices at some stage in the, say, let's say the next month are going to shoot up, well, it might be worthwhile filling up your car just before that happens. It might be worthwhile if you've got oil central heating at home to fill up your tank before that happens. Now, that again is wisdom. That is not fear. That is not worry. We're not talking about prepping. We know that this is a season. And I want to look at the potential fallout around all of this and what could potentially happen. So let me just throw this up. This is from the Telegraph today, and it's a little bit small. So let me see if I can make it bigger for myself. So if you go to the bottom, you will see 7:04 a.m. Oil jumps after Iran votes to shut the key trade routes. So let me just point out that Iran threatened to shut the Strait of Hormuz basically after the Soleimani attack, right? And if you go back even to the 1980s, they tried to shut it, but it's not that easy to shut. So I don't see a full closure here. 7:45 a.m. Iran closing the Strait of Hormuz would be high risk strategy. Now, the reason they say it's a high risk strategy is because it will affect Iranian economy and it will also affect Chinese economy. Now, I have seen pundits come out already and say, well, if they shut the strait, it's not going to have an effect on certain parts of the world, but it will have a major effect on China. Um, Half of the oil that goes through there goes to China. Now, that again is on the I guess on the model that it would be shut entirely. I don't see a full entire shut. And if it is the case that they shut it partially, they're able to cause an interruption to Western shipping, but they allow Chinese shipping to continue. Well, that's not going to have the desired effect on China from the West. That's not going to provoke China into telling Iran, no, don't do this. In fact, that would be favorable for the Chinese government because then they would see a weakening of Western nations whilst at the same time they're continuing to operate. 8:12 a.m. This is Lamy from the UK warns Iran against blocking key waterway. Now, if there's anything that is going to threaten the IRGC, it is certainly not David Lamy. It will not be. 9:16 a.m. The US, it says, is at risk of recession if Iran closes the Strait of Hormuz. I'm not sure about that. I think probably when we look at this, the UK is at more risk, right? It says UK bosses cut jobs amid Middle Eastern fears. Now, why is the UK more at risk? Well, the UK has very little, if any, in terms of its own independence in energy production. Uh, the UK took down and actually dismantled, completely demolished their own factories in terms of coal production and energy production, so that we're dependent on different nations. Now, under Donald Trump in America, one of the things that has already been a phrase coined is drill, drill, drill. And I think that is going to be the chant that we hear. Drill, drill, drill. So here's the thing. Now, a partial closure will still have an effect. Now, it will have an effect to a degree, and it will mean that America has to have a prolonged that area. They have to maintain ships that area to try and circumvent this. And at the same time, this is the problem that comes off the back of this. The Houthis have already said, let me see if I can find this. The Houthis have already said that they they're going to strike back at America because of the nuclear strikes or the strikes on the nuclear facilities. So they're looking to retaliate. What we could see off that is more Red Sea disruption. Now, if we have a disruption in the Red Sea and we have a disruption in the Strait of Hormuz, then that's a major, major issue. Sorry if you can hear my child running in and out there. That's him apparently trying to be quiet. Um, so if they close or if there's disruption in both, you will see a disruption to the world's oil prices. Now you've already seen a little bit of bump and it's recorrected itself already. I don't think we're quite there just yet. I'm looking that if we're going to see major hike in oil prices, and like even if you go back to the Ukrainian conflict, the Russian Ukraine conflict, one of the things that we saw off the back of that wasn't just the hiking of prices, but then it was passed down, and you started to see profiteering happening within companies that they started to exponentially, even though the barrels of oil, the governments worked to maintain those, there was profiteering happening at the pump. There was, you know, sky high prices. I think that we are going to see a rise in this, and I think that this is going to have an economic effect. I think, in terms of America, you will hear that chant, drill, drill, drill. You will hear the, the self production and the self reliance that America is looking for in terms of energy will be key for them. But the UK is at major risk. Germany is at major risk. Parts of the EU are at major risk. Now, at the minute, everybody's saying China is at major risk, but China has had close relations with the IRGC. In fact, we know that China was certainly about 15 years ago supplying facilities or supplying technology to allow for enrichment to the IRGC's uranium program or nuclear program. The same goes in terms of Russia. We saw yesterday the head or the deputy chief of the Security Council of Russia say that there are countries willing to help Iran. I wonder who those are. After the nuclear strike, in terms of after Donald Trump actually stepping up, and we were all praying that he would, and now we've seen a fulfillment of Jeremiah 49, and we have seen the destabilizing of the destabilizing power, right? So the IRGC have destabilized that region for 46 years. They have worked at trying to break down any type of peace deal. If you think back to October 7th, right? October 7th, 2023, just pre that, Benjamin Netanyahu was ready to sign, and so was Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, a historic peace deal, right? To bring peace to that region. What happened? The IRGC funded their proxy Hamas to perform October 7th and start a war, and then Saudi Arabia had to back away from that deal. They're destabilizing force in the Middle East, and they're also a terror force. That's what they're about. So it had to be done. But now we've got to sort of look at what comes next. And what comes next, I think, it can have an economic effect for a lot of us, but there's more to it. Because if you start to see the Houthis take up root or take up residence and try and cause disruption in the Red Sea, if you start to see the disruption at the Strait of Hormuz, and then we've already seen the jamming, the signal jamming, um, and if they decide to let Chinese shipping continue through that strait, but whilst at the same time affect any other Western shipping and Western routes, um, which seems to be already kind of a tentative approach, because when we look at this, companies are already instructing vessels to limit their times in the strait. Ship tracking data shows at least 5 tankers turning away, and it's already having an effect. But what does this mean long term in terms of prophecy? Well, excuse me, this could allow for the connection between Jeremiah 49 and Ezekiel 38. Now, not instantaneously, and I don't think it's going to be like tomorrow, but what happens, right? We know in Ezekiel 38 that there is a hook put in the jaw of Gog. Now, for people who are in dispute about who Gog is, let me just end that dispute. Amos 7 in the Septuagint, Amos 7 verse 11 tells you that Gog is the king, or he is the chief caterpillar, so he's a demon, right? Or let's say a principality. And he is the king of the locusts. In other words, we know because the Bible identifies who the king of the locusts is in Revelation 9 and gives him the name Abaddon or Apollyon. In other words, Gog is a destroyer. He is a principality. He is a spirit who will inhabit a man, inhabit an individual. Is that Putin? Is that Recep Tayyip Erdogan? We don't know. I would suggest, in my opinion, Putin is a likely candidate. But what we will see, I think, is this hook in the jaw of Gog, and what could and this kind of provocation from the individual who is a man to give himself over to this spirit and go and attack Israel. Could it be energy based? Could it be um, in terms of what has happened economically? So if there is a recession, and then if this goes further, and let's say it lasts 3 to 5 months, the disruption at the Strait and the disruption of the Red Sea from the Houthis, if this lasts, let's say, over 5 months, you've got a global depression happening. But one of the things that we know is that Israel have reported the Leviathan field, which is made, even though they're not active, have not actively, you know, exploited that field of oil reserved of shale oil has made it enticing, has made it an enticing area for many people in the world. So, if for instance you have China continuing to have their shipping through, then you have the West, let's say Europe, let's say Britain, let's say Germany, those kind of places that are struggling under economic pressure. Now, this is conjecture. This is not saying for so saith the Lord. I will say that I 100% believe there's an economic problem coming from this. Um, and it will be passed down to each and every one of us. But the conjecture element here is this going to lead to the hook in the jaw of Gog? Because it could do. It could be the hook in terms of Russia is already expanding so much militarily and financially, economically when it comes to the war on with Ukraine. And then you see Russia is also a partnership with Iran. Iran could be in this state where they're causing the partial friction, and their proxies, the Houthis, are causing partial friction to the world's economy. It could be that at some stage, whoever Gog is invited or kind of brought in to do the next thing, take things to the next level. An energy war crisis where the energy wars are looking to a fruitful land. Because Isaiah 60, verse 5 says, "Then you shall see and become radiant, and your heart," this is talking about Israel, your heart shall swell with joy, because the abundance or the riches of the sea shall be turned to you. This is talking about Israel. Well, I believe the riches of the sea are in terms of what has been found energy wise, what has been found in terms of the Leviathan field and the oil reserves there. So if you're starting to see the world in crisis, could this be why countries don't get involved, because they are craving, I guess, the scraps of the oil production? They're going, well, Israel has an oil reserve here. Israel has this abundance here. Could this be the next step on? Now, here's my caveat with this: it's not now. I don't believe we've had Jeremiah 49, then Ezekiel 38. I think there's things, I personally think Isaiah 17 has to fit in between there, and that will come from skirmishes. But the next step, and the step that we are seeing right now, is disruption to the Strait of Hormuz and potential disruption to the Red Sea by the Houthis. So if you're seeing that, you will then get the knock on effect of economic hardship in terms of the rise of energy prices, like we saw with Ukraine and Russia, but probably to another level. Now, if we go back to Ukraine and Russia, the world was not in a great place financially. It's even worse now. The debt crisis is out of control. We had, if you go back a month ago, you had Japan, who has something like 287% debt compared to GDP. So the debt is 287% more than the GDP coming in. And they reported something like 8 trillion in losses when it came to their insurance market. Well, they're sitting right now, teetering on the edge. And already we've seen, apparently through like of solar flares or whatever they said was the reason behind the blackouts in Portugal and in France, whatever the reason, we saw that there was a ripple effect onto the UK. So that's set to continue. And what I'm saying is I think that it's just a little bit of wisdom to sit there and go, right, okay, if there is a potential energy issue, I'm not going to say crisis, but energy issue coming, what do you do as a believer who is forewarned about this to go, right, okay, I'm forewarned. What do I do? How am I as wise as a serpent in this time? Now, I know that there are certain things coming into play, like that try and stem your ability to, I guess, deal with situations like this. I know that in certain parts of Canada right now, they have brought in a fireplace tax or fireplace license, that you need to have a license to have a fireplace. So you can't heat your home that way without a license. Well, that's just more and more authoritarian control. But here's the thing: God gives you wisdom. We're to ask for wisdom liberally. And that means that we're not to worry about these things, but we are to be forewarned. And because you're forewarned, right now, you could, if you've got enough, to go and fill up your tank. Right now, it might not be for another 4 weeks or so that you start to see a ripple effect at the pump. But if you fill up your tank now, you're filling up your tank at a better price regardless, and you're sorted. So there's wisdom in that. It might be that the governments of this world, certainly the United States, looks at the potential energy crisis coming and says, right, we're just going to go in and we're going to attack the disruption in the Strait of Hormuz. But again, that will cause a delay. So I personally think, and I might be wrong, but I personally think there is a disruption that is sitting, that is looming, that is going to have a knock-on effect economically when it comes to energy prices. And as that's the case, I think that there's a call on each and every individual to be as wise as serpents and as harmless as doves. Matthew 10:16. So with that being said, it doesn't mean that you have to fear anything. It just means that you trust in God and you have that wisdom. You're forewarned, so you can prepare. The other side of this is to look at what can go on. And if we look on down the road at Ezekiel 38, which I don't believe we're here for, I'm not dogmatic about it. We could be, but I don't believe we are. So if you look on down the road at Ezekiel 38, you know that where this is going, that I personally believe that there could be this potential energy crisis that provokes a war or provokes skirmishes or provokes like a hook in the jaw, Gog, to come to Israel. And one of the things that we know that Israel has is this Leviathan field. So, guys, I just wanted to jump on here and say this. Join us tomorrow live at, I think, just after 1 p.m. Central Standard Time. 7 p.m. About 1:15 Central Standard Time and 7:15 British Summer Time. So join us live tomorrow and then again on Wednesday. Following that, I'll be in Italy for a few, I think about 8 or 9 days, something like that. I'll be in Italy, and then yeah, be back after that. We've got a load of things planned, a load of things going on. So we're making this documentary in terms of spiritual warfare. So we're doing some recording out there as well. So yeah, all good. So guys, God bless. I call you the head and not the tail, above and not beneath, kings, queens, and priests, in Jesus' mighty name. Remember, you can do all things through Christ who strengthens you. Amen. And remember, if you're not subscribed, take an opportunity right now and subscribe. Guys, God bless.